In a way, the book really tries to answer some of these questions. And the most interesting aspect of the book is that it takes lessons from business, right? So it takes lessons from great corporations who have done well and takes some of those lessons and sometimes corporations who have failed and takes those lessons and tries to apply them to their personal lives and how we can live a better life, both from a career as well as from a personal perspective. Thanks, Mohit, for setting the context. That was brilliant. So I'm talking about this book called How Will You Measure Your Life? This is written by a person called Clayton Christensen. He's actually somebody who's a Harvard Business School professor. He actually passed out of Harvard Business School. He was the 79 batch of Harvard Business School. He's well known for another book though. I mean, a lot of you might have heard of a book called The Innovator's Dilemma. It talks about disruptive technologies. He in fact coined the word disruptive technologies and how disruptive technologies can take down large companies. So what made Clayton then write this different kind of book? What really happened was Clayton was the 1979 batch of Harvard Business School and he used to keep attending his reunion. So he went to the 5th one and he felt everybody's doing pretty well, their lives, their personal as well as professional lives. Then he went to the 10th one. He found some changes. Some people are not doing so well in their personal lives. Maybe they're doing okay in their professional lives. Finally, he went to his 20th one and there he felt that a lot of people who were insanely successful actually in their professional lives were doing quite badly. A lot of them were doing quite badly in their personal lives. And he tried to understand, in fact, some of them went to jail. I mean, one of them, for instance, the most famous one, if you remember, there was a guy called Jeffrey Skilling. He was the CEO of Enron. So he actually went to jail. He was Clayton Christensen's batchmate from 1979. He had done very well. He had, from Harvard, he joined McKinsey. He was one of the youngest partners ever. He, of course, then went on to become the CEO of Enron, and we know what happened. So he tried to understand what changed. I mean, I know all these people for a long time. They were such great people. They had values systems. They had promised they'll do this, and what changed for them? So he wanted to find that out. He was also looking at taking a course. He used to take a course in Harvard where he talked about building a sustainable enterprise. So what used to happen was at the end of the course and the last day of the course, he would ask his students to ponder over 3 very important questions. And what are those questions? How can I be sure I'll be successful and happy in my career? How can I be sure my relationship with my spouse, my children, extended family and close friends become an enduring source of success? And how can I sure I live a life of integrity and stay out of jail? In a way, the book really tries to answer some of these questions. And the most interesting aspect of the book is that it takes lessons from business, right? So it takes lessons from great corporations who have done well and takes some of those lessons and sometimes corporations who have failed and takes those lessons and tries to apply them to their personal lives and how we can live a better life, both from a career as well as from a personal perspective. So basically, let me share one of the interesting ones. So first one is actually about looking at the theory of good capital and bad capital. So when an investor actually does an investment, he looks at 2 things, right? He looks at growth and he looks at profitability. Now, both of these are very difficult to do, especially for a young company who's trying to get along and try to make a share in the market. It's very difficult to do looking at both growth and profitability. So what he talks about, he says good capital is about the fact when in the beginning you are looking at profitability but not looking at growth. So a lot of what research has shown is that 93% of the companies that have finally become successful, they have been successful because they were not sticking to their original idea. They became something else. So we have lot of examples. For instance, let's say if you think about Nokia. Nokia used to be a lumberjack company, but it ended up becoming a telecom company. So there are a lot of such examples. So he figured that good capital is when it is patient about the initial profitability, when the company is trying to figure out how it will actually become profitable, how it will actually grow. And then, of course, if you push them for growth, they can succeed. This is very relevant in current times. I mean, if you are keeping abreast of the startup world, I mean, a lot of this is completely going haywire in here. And the next thing, of course, he talked about was that bad capital. So bad capital is about pushing for growth without the company having some kind of footsteps, some kind of area where they can compete and they can win. So if you look at 2 examples, there were 2 very famous examples that he talked about. One, of course, is Iridium. So Iridium used to be this company of satellite phones built by Motorola, and they invested billions. They built all over the world satellites so they actually made the very famous tagline they had, which is geography is history. So which means you can call anybody from the North Pole and call anywhere in the world, and that'll be easy. What they didn't realize is nobody wants to carry a sat phone. The sat phones are big phones, which means either you have to carry them in a big packet or in a big so that way they realized that mobile phones has to be the way go, but they never did that. So never went to customer to understand what it means to actually have a big satellite phone, whether that is something that is interesting. So that is an example where you have invested the entire, you have put satellites all over the world, you are investing and you're pushing companies for growth, but however you don't have any profitability, you don't have any customers to actually taken that up. And the next example, of course, is Honda. Now, Honda wanted to compete in the US. It wanted to compete with Harley Davidson. In the beginning, it was nowhere. It was a spectacular failure. However, what happened thereafter was they had something called dirt bikes. Now, these dirt bikes were being used by their employees to actually go from one place to the other. They were also being used to do off-road biking. Now, that's something that slowly took off. But even then, Honda in Japan, the management was not convinced, so they did not give them any money. They said, you become profitable using that part of the exercise, because otherwise it's very impossible for us to take this forward. So they slowly grew, and then eventually Honda became huge in the US. So this is an example where you have to basically be patient. In our lives, when it comes to personal life, we have to be patient, we have to invest time and effort. Now that time and effort, if you don't invest, you will not. So a lot of times we think that career is very important. We will have immediate results when we put effort and time. But however, what you will find is that if you invest time and effort in friendships and in family, there will be a lot of rewards in the future. But you have to wait for that. It's not something that will happen very easily. So further, he talked about finding happiness in our career. And let me read a small section of that, where he talks about a strategy for life. So strategy, whether in companies or in life, is created through hundreds of everyday decisions about how we spend our time, energy, and money. With every moment of your time, every decision about how you spend your energy and your money, you are making a statement about what really matters to you. You can talk all you want about having a clear purpose and a strategy for your life, but ultimately this means nothing if you're not investing the resources you have in a way that is consistent with your strategy. In the end, the strategy is nothing but good intentions unless it's effectively implemented. How do you make sure that you're implementing the strategy you truly want to implement? Watch where your resources flow, the resources allocation process. If it is supporting the strategy you've decided upon, you run the risk of a serious problem. You might think you're a charitable person, but how often do you really give your time or money to a cause or an organization that you really care about? If your family matters most to you, when you think about all the decisions you made with your time in a week, does your family come out on top? If the decision you make about where you invest your blood, sweat, and tears are not consistent with the person you aspire to be, you will never become that person. So last part, which was, of course, staying out of jail, is simply about integrity, right? So he makes this fantastic statement where he says 100% of time is easier than 98% of the time, which essentially means that if you are making compromises, even if it's that 2%, you feel maybe I'll do it this one time and it'll be okay. But this is how it creeps up. And eventually what happened, and as we saw in some of his batchmates, that's what made the difference. It crept up on them, and then some of them unfortunately went to jail. So I read this book when I actually turned 40. So midlife crisis, whatever you might say. I actually moved on from the corporate world to the startup world, and now I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm enjoying every bit of it. I also went back to quizzing, which is something I loved. So whether you're below 40 or above 40, if you happen to read this book, I'm sure it'll help you answer some questions you might have when you traverse the journey of life. Thank you.